Have you ever heard of a grudge so deep, so all-consuming that it led to the complete and utter annihilation of a city? A city wiped from the face of the earth, its very soil cursed. Today, we're rediving into one of history's most brutal final chapters, the Third Punic War and the total destruction of Carthage. Welcome back to the channel. Now, if you've been following our series on the Punic Wars, you know the story so far. Rome and Carthage, two ancient superpowers, had already fought two epic, bloody conflicts for control of the Mediterranean. Hannibal, the legendary Carthaginian general, had brought Rome to its knees in the Second Punic War but ultimately couldn't secure victory. In the end, Rome triumphed, stripping Carthage of its empire, its navy, and its wealth. Carthage was a shadow of its former self, forced to pay a massive war indemnity to Rome over 50 years for half a century. An uneasy peace held. Carthage, despite its losses, was a city of merchants. It was resilient. Slowly but surely it began to rebuild its economy. Its farms were productive, its trade routes began to hum with activity again, and the city started to recover its prosperity. But this very success was a problem for some in Rome. Enter Marcus Porcius Cato, better known as Cato the Elder. Cato was a powerful, influential Roman senator, a veteran of the Second Punic War who harbored an unshakable hatred for Carthage. He had seen firsthand the terror Hannibal had unleashed upon Italy. For him, a recovering Carthage, no matter how weakened, was a potential threat. He believed that as long as Carthage existed, Rome would never be truly safe. There's a famous story about Cato. After a visit to Carthage on a diplomatic mission, he was stunned by how prosperous the city had become. From that day on, he ended every single speech he gave in the Roman Senate, no matter the topic, with the same chilling phrase, Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed. Imagine that. A debate about road construction. Furthermore, Carthage must be destroyed. A discussion on grain prices. And by the way, Carthage must be destroyed. It became his obsession, a constant drumbeat of war in the heart of Roman politics. Cato wasn't alone. A powerful faction in Rome agreed with him. They saw Carthage's economic revival not as a sign of a peaceful neighbor, but as a future rivalry arming for a war of revenge. They were just waiting for a pretext, any excuse to finish the job once and for all. And Carthage, tragically, would give them one. The peace treaty after the Second Punic War had a critical clause. Carthage was forbidden from waging war without Rome's permission. This was meant to keep them in check. However, it also left them vulnerable. Their neighbor, the Numidian king Massinissa, was a staunch ally of Rome. Knowing Carthage's hands were tied, Massinissa repeatedly raided Carthaginian territory, stealing land and livestock, pushing the boundaries year after year. Carthage sent desperate appeals to Rome. Help us, your ally is attacking us. But Rome, influenced by Cato's war-hungry faction, did nothing. They turned a blind eye, allowing the provocations to continue. For decades, Carthage endured this humiliation. Finally, around 151 BC, they had enough. The war indemnity to Rome had been fully paid. A new generation of Carthaginians who hadn't experienced the horrors of the last war felt their honor was at stake. They decided to act. In a fateful decision, Carthage raised an army and counterattacked Massinissa to reclaim their stolen lands. Militarily, it was a disaster. The Numidians crushed the Carthaginian force, but the real disaster was political. By raising an army and fighting without Roman consent, Carthage had technically broken the treaty. This was the moment Cato and his allies had been waiting for. The pretext was served on a silver platter. In Rome, the Senate declared war. But they played a cruel, deceptive game. They sent envoys to Carthage, suggesting a peaceful resolution was possible. The terrified Carthaginians, knowing they stood no chance against Rome's might, agreed to do whatever Rome demanded. First, Rome demanded 300 children from Carthage's noblest families as hostages. It was a heart-wrenching, terrible demand, but hoping to appease the Romans and save their city, the Carthaginians complied. We can only imagine the tears and terror as those children were handed over. But it wasn't enough. Next, Roman officials arrived and demanded that Carthage surrender all of its weapons and war machines, every sword, every spear, every catapult. Again, hoping this would finally satisfy Rome, the Carthaginians obeyed. They stripped their city bare of its defenses, handing over a mountain of armaments. Their city was now completely defenseless. It was then, with Carthage disarmed and its children held hostage, that the Roman consul delivered the final, devastating ultimatum. He announced the Roman Senate's true decree. The city of Carthage was to be abandoned. Its entire population had to move at least 10 miles inland, away from the sea that was the source of their life and prosperity. The city itself, their home for centuries, was to be utterly destroyed. The reaction in Carthage was one of pure shock, followed by incandescent rage. They had been tricked, humiliated, and led into a trap. The citizens who had earlier argued for peace were torn apart in the streets. There was no more talk of surrender. If they were going to lose their city, they would lose it fighting. They had no weapons, but they had fury and desperation. What followed was one of the most heroic and tragic last stands in history. The gates of Carthage were sealed. The entire city became a frantic, desperate weapons factory. Women cut off their long hair to be braided into ropes for catapults. Men worked day and night, melting down statues, pots, and household metals to forge new swords and shields. For 3 long years, the defenseless city held out against the might of the Roman legions. The siege was brutal. The Romans, led initially by incompetent commanders, struggled to break through Carthage's massive walls. The Carthaginians fought with the ferocity of cornered animals, launching daring raids and repelling assault after assault, but the outcome was inevitable. In 146 BC, a new, brilliant Roman general arrived to take command. Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of the great Scipio Africanus who had defeated Hannibal. Scipio Aemilianus was methodical and ruthless. He built a massive mole to blockade Carthage's harbor, cutting off all supplies. Starvation began to grip the city. Finally, the Roman legions breached the walls. What followed was not a battle, but a week-long massacre. The Romans fought their way through the city, street by street, house by house. The fighting was horrific. The narrow streets were so choked with the dead that the Romans had to stop and clear them to advance. They showed no mercy, slaughtering men, women, and children alike. When the slaughter was over, the last 50,000 survivors, out of a city that once held perhaps 500,000 people, surrendered. They were all sold into slavery. But even that wasn't the end. The Roman Senate, fulfilling Cato's grim wish, ordered the city to be systematically demolished. For 17 days, the once great city of Carthage was burned, torn down, and leveled to the ground. Roman priests then performed rituals to curse the land, sowing it with salt to ensure that nothing would ever grow there again. Carthage was to be erased not just from the map, but from memory. Scipio Aemilianus, the conqueror, stood on a hill overlooking the burning ruins of the city he had just destroyed. It is said that he wept. When a companion asked him why, he quoted a line from Homer's Iliad about the fall of Troy, reflecting that one day, even the great city of Rome might suffer the same fate. It was a moment of profound insight. Amidst one of history's most profound acts of destruction, Carthage was gone. Rome was the undisputed master of the Mediterranean. The Punic Wars were over. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. It's a dark story, but a powerful reminder of how far empires will go to secure their power. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what you think about Rome's final solution for Carthage. Was it a military necessity or a brutal war crime? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious.